Hello and welcome to TMH Daily English News. Our headlines today include a new food security assessment shows that almost 40% of Tigrayans are currently suffering in the extreme lack of food, and U.S. calls on the Ethiopians to release all of those detained under the state of emergency, and Ethiopia upgrades its council in Somaliland to ambassador. Moving on to our main news, a new food security assessment released today by the WFP shows that almost 40% of Tigrayans are currently suffering in an extreme lack of food. The Tigrai Emergency Food Security Assessment found that 83% of people are food insecure. Families are exhausting all means to feed themselves, with 3/4 of the population using extreme coping strategies to survive, as said by the United Nations World Food Program assessment indicated. Diets are increasingly impoverished as food items become unavailable and families rely almost exclusively on cereals, while limiting portion sizes and the number of meals that they eat each day to make sure whatever food is available stretch as far as possible. In terms of nutrition, the survey found that 13% of Tigrayans' children under 5 and half of all pregnant breastfeeding women are extremely malnourished, leading to poor pregnancy outcomes, low birth weight, as well as stunting and maternal deaths. Michael Dunford, WFP's Regional Director for Eastern Africa, says this bleak assessment reconfirms that what people of the northern Ethiopia need is scaled up humanitarian assistance, and they need it now. WFP said it is doing all it can to ensure all convoys with food and medicine make it through the front lines, adding that all the parties to the conflict should also agree to the humanitarian pause and formally agree to transport corridors to that supplies can reach the millions besieged by hunger. The UN said no aid convoy has entered into the region of Tigray and some 6 million people since mid-December have been in need. WFP estimates that on average, crisis-affected families in northern Ethiopia were getting less than 30% of their caloric needs in the month and pushing people deeper and deeper into crisis. It's expected that the constant humanitarian food assistance will be required throughout the entirety of the year of 2022. WFP's Northern Ethiopia response urgently requires that $337 million to deliver assistance to more than 9 million people over the next 6 months and will begin running out of capacity to purchase food in the month of February. In a related development, UN OSHA said nutrition supplies for the supplementary feeding and treatment of severe acute malnutrition in Tigray have already run out. According to OSHA's update yesterday, the UN and NGO partners have been forced to scale back operations in Tigray due to the severe shortage of supplies, fuel, as well as cash. Organizations have warned that the operations could cease completely by the end of February. Doctors have said to be among those begging for food in Tigray region. Some of the nurses and doctors at the biggest hospitals in Ethiopia's war-torn Tigray region are having to beg for food to feed themselves, as one of the medics told BBC reports. They've not been paid for 8 months, forcing them to find other ways to support their families. The doctor's account comes as the UN reports that the severe hunger was hitting ever more than ever in people in Tigray. Banks have also been shutting, meaning that people cannot access savings or funds to pay others. Speaking on conditions of anonymity, a doctor from Eider Hospital in Tigray's capital, Ma'ala, told BBC that seeing nurses and doctors queuing for food parcels had become normal over the past 7 months. For most of the 14-month war, and much of Tigray has been cut off completely from humanitarian aid, making it hard to deliver vital aid as well as medical supplies. Doctors also spoke about how the lack of medical supplies has affected treatment process, and instead of sterilized surgical gauzes, essential of cleaning wounds during and after surgery, Eider Hospital has been relying on donations of clothes, which are then cut up and sterilized for use. Fatima Sator, a spokesperson for the International Committee of Red Cross in Addis Ababa, confirmed this extreme situation. Let's take a listen.
The colleagues who were in Tigray, who just came back from Tigray, they saw doctors using single-use items like gloves, surgical materials, and what they do, they have to wash them and to reuse them. And this obviously increased the risk of a patient to have complication, to have infection. So, I mean, at the same time, when I think about the assistance that we were able to provide yesterday, I can imagine that it's quite a big relief.
Fatima Sator stressed the urgent need for the people's help to ensure normalcy. As we move on to our next news, U.S. has called for Ethiopians to release all of those detained under the state of emergency. The United States on Thursday said it welcomed the decisions by the Ethiopia's cabinet to approve the lifting of a 6-month state of emergency and called on the government to release all of those detained under the state of emergency. State Department spokesperson Ned Price told reporters that Washington hopes the House of People's Representatives approves the decision to lift the state of emergency soon after the cabinet on Wednesday approved its lifting ahead of its expiration. Ethiopia declared the state of emergency back in November 2020 after forces in the northern region of Tigray said that they had gained territory and were considering on marching onto the capital of Addis Ababa. Price said that the reports of renewed fighting in the Afar regions are very concerning, saying, "We repeat our calls to all actors to cease all of the offensive operations, which also hinder the process of humanitarian access, as we all know is extremely crucial at the moment." Ethiopia upgrades into the Council in Somaliland to ambassador. Ethiopia has upgraded its diplomatic standing with the breakaway region of Somaliland following the appointment of an ambassador to Hargeisa. President Sahle-Work Zewde decreed Wednesday the promotion of Saeed Mohammed, who has been the head of consulate in the Somaliland, to a full ambassador. The new changes follow a visit by the president, Muse Bihi, on January 19th to Ethiopia, where he had been invited by the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed himself. Though Ethiopia has maintained, including last week, that Somaliland is part of Somalia, the upgrade of its diplomatic status sends a strong indication of its intention of considering the recognition of the breakaway region. The upgrade to fully embassy of its consul in Somaliland also comes amid reports that Ethiopia is negotiating a stake in the ancient port of Zayla, which is in the Somaliland region. Currently, Ethiopia has 19% stake at the port of Berbera in joint of concession with the UAE's P&O's ports. Our final news for today is political science scholars have said that Ethiopia's new national dialogue cannot deliver an inclusive peace. Timnit Bayru has more on this story.
Political science scholar says Ethiopia's new national dialogue cannot deliver inclusive peace. Although Abiy has long been ignoring calls for a negotiated ceasefire, his newfound enthusiasm for a national dialogue is welcomed by the international community and the Ethiopians tired of war. Melkesa Gamachu, visiting assistant professor of political science at Albion College in the U.S. and formerly senior member of Ethiopia's Oromia Regional State Administration, says the Ethiopian government is not ready to participate in a genuine national dialogue and negotiated deal that would bring sustainable peace to the country. One reason for skepticism is the fact that Ethiopian officials have repeatedly made it clear that the Tigray Forces Oromo Liberation Army would not be included in any future national dialogue. When several MPs objected to the Commission for National Dialogue's establishment proclamation, claiming it lays the ground for negotiations with the TPLF and OLA, for example, the Legal and Administrative Affairs Committee Chair, Saganet Mengistu, claimed that the proclamation is not at all about negotiation. She warned about misrepresenting the purpose of the initiative and insisted that there is no article or word in the document about negotiations. But what is the purpose of a national dialogue that does not involve any negotiation between warring sides? Melkesa asks. By excluding the TPLF and OLA from the so-called national dialogue, Abiy's government made it clear that its aim is not to achieve sustainable peace and to lead the country into negotiated political transition, but to achieve a series of short-term objectives. The primary objective of Abiy's national dialogue agenda appears to be easing the mounting diplomatic pressures on his government. Recently, concrete measures taken particularly by the United States against Abiy's government have led to economic and diplomatic tremors in Addis Ababa. By establishing a commission for national dialogue, which does not even have the mandate to initiate negotiation between warring parties, Abiy is now trying to create the false impression that he is doing something to end the violence to convince the US to lift its sanctions against his government. The second goal of the proposed dialogue is to buy time for military preparation in anticipation of the deepening civil war. Sources in Abiy's Prosperity Party alleged that in the last couple of months alone, tens of thousands of youths have been conscripted into the federal military and are currently being trained in camps across the country. The national dialogue process therefore appears to be a ploy by the government to buy time to prepare its military to launch another attack on its adversaries in Tigray and beyond. And perhaps the most important goal of Abiy's national dialogue ruse is to deceive the Ethiopian people and increase the legitimacy of his government in their eyes. The Abiy administration started drafting a new constitution that will reconfigure identities and national boundaries some 2 years ago, long before the beginning of the war, Malkesa said, claiming that he was privy to the issue when he was a senior member of the Oromia state administration. The Abiy administration will likely use the proposed national dialogue to create the illusion that there is widespread informed support for the new constitution. After all, those who have the strongest opposition to Abiy's vision for Ethiopia, and thus his constitutional plans, are conveniently left out of this conversation. Ethiopia is undoubtedly experiencing unprecedented national crisis. However, an inclusive, broad, participatory negotiation platform can still produce a peace deal that will bring back stability and prosperity to the country. Unfortunately, Abiy's so-called Commission for National Dialogue cannot provide such a platform. According to Malkesa, Abiy is nowhere near ready to take his place at the negotiating table. He is still trying to pull the wool over the eyes of the international community and the Ethiopian public. He is still convinced that he can decisively win the war, silence all his opponents, and build a new Ethiopia without any input from scores of Ethiopians who do not support his vision. The analyst said the international community should step to end this charade and pressure the government to allow a neutral party to facilitate a truly inclusive, comprehensive national dialogue. Otherwise, sustainable peace will remain elusive for Ethiopia for years to come. Malkesa continued.
That concludes our news for today. Thank you for all those who tuned with me live. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.